you're going to pay an attorney to go represent the tenant, the majority of all eviction cases are non-payment of rent.
Right.
Just
Exactly.
pay the rent.
Pay the rent.
Yeah. And then the tenant gets to stay, the landlord gets made whole. Litigating an eviction, so everybody wastes attorney's fees, doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big proponent of that one, even though there are other things that I think are potentially a good idea. But I think rental assistance over the pandemic, federal government put out millions upon millions of dollars, and a lot of people were able to stay.
You're listening to the AZREIA Show. If you're looking for quality real estate investing information that you can trust, you've found it. Stay tuned and join the tens of thousands of members that have already benefited from AZREIA, your home for education, market information, support, and networking opportunities that will advance your real estate investing career.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the AZREIA Show. I am your host, Marcus Maloney, and we have our co-host and executive director, Mike Del Prete, on today. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for asking, Marcus.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about legislation and law. We have our very special guest, Mark Zinman with Zona Law Group, and we're going to be talking about all things law and legislation. So if you're a landlord, you really need to listen up. You need to make sure you record, repeat, re-listen, and everything like that, because we have an attorney in our presence, and he's going to give you exactly what you need to make sure that you hedge any risk that you may have with tenant complaints, laws, or anything like that. So, Mark, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, morning, gents. How you guys doing? I'm doing well.
Awesome. Doing great. So, just real quick before we get started, we're definitely familiar with you, but just to our listeners that may not know about Zona Law, kind of give us just a real snippet, really quick background of Zona Law and what you all provide.
Sure. So we're a small firm, we're a boutique. We just handle landlord-tenant and real estate matters. So a lot of that is your evictions, your fair housing, security deposit, litigation, those kind of things, and then also issues when people buy and sell homes, kind of the closing, suing over those issues, just helping also creative financing, things like that we work with the investors directly on, as well, from mom and pops up to the large REITs, single family, multifamily, kind of the gambit. If you own it and rent it, mobile homes, manufactured housing, we do that as well.
Oh, okay. So when you say creative financing, so you're dealing with the carrybacks, subject twos, and all that whole world?
Correct.
Oh, yep. Awesome. Good to know. All right. Perfect. So we're here. We got some special topics to go over. And so let's start from the top, right? We're traditionally landlord-friendly state, right? It still are, or are we?
Yeah, we're kind of in the throes of changing that, and kind of I would say we're a big question mark right now. But historically correct. I mean, generally considered relatively landlord-friendly compared to other states.
And if just for everyone, the difference between landlord-friendly and tenant-friendly, how would you describe that?
For example, in Arizona, generally, if you followed the process, you can complete an eviction around a month, maybe 6 weeks to get somebody physically ousted, if for just non-payment of rent. Or if you go to Chicago, it could literally take months to do that same process, even if it's just simple as clear-cut as they don't want to pay their rent.
Got it. And what's going on that's making us a question mark?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's speculation. Half of California is coming to the state, which would probably be the reasoning for it. But we're definitely have shifted. I think for the first time, I can't even tell you how long we have a Democratic governor. We're split between the legislature and the governor, and obviously we have 2 Democratic senators as well. So I think politically we are very much a purple state now.
Okay.
Where I think historically we've been much more red.
Yeah.
And traditionally, obviously, individuals have their own opinions on certain legislation, but historically, red states have been much more pro-landlord business rights and vice versa.
And do you think that, I know a lot of people from California are here, does that also happen because maybe our growth, our population growth, our job growth, there's just a lot of, it's different. Phoenix is different now than it was 5-10 years ago.
Oh yeah, I mean the amount of growth. I mean, I attribute that really to Governor Ducey. I mean, the amount of growth that our state, specifically our city and county, have gone through is remarkable.
It has been.
You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that moved here in the past couple of years. That changes the dynamic of everything from voting to rent prices, because you can't build houses fast enough for that many people to come here. Yep. And so we're this year we're finally kind of catching up on the building side of things.
Do you know how far behind we are? 'Cause I heard a while back it was 8 years behind in supply or something. Is there
I mean, I think the
stat
number is
on-
over 250,000 units that we still need.
wow.
Wow.
And we just interviewed the Airbnb queen, so that's like a whole nother factor of, projects taking up housing.
Yeah,
Right.
then that changes the market as well. Yeah, the whole short-term concept is pulling, obviously, houses in that direction, which would otherwise be rentals.
Growing pains, man.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things that baffles me sometimes is you have a lot of people with the exodus out of California because of a lot of California legislation. But then they come here and then they want to enact the same California legislation here. I'm like, well, you left there because of that, but then you want to come here and make things, similar. And we don't.
It's the great irony of how that works out. It never makes sense to me. It's the reason
Right.
we have different states. You have different policies.
Yep.
Well, speaking of states,
Yep.
you said something important at our monthly meeting a couple months ago during your presentation about federal updates. So maybe we can go into this first time you said the administration ever butted in on housing?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, landlord-tenant matters have always been states' rights because, I mean, just think very basically the way you look at Arizona. We're one big suburb in Phoenix, right?
Okay.
Where you compare that to New York City, people are stacked on top of each other, obviously, because they like that lifestyle. They like living in the city. Here, we're suburbia. And so you have to have different landlord-tenant laws to take into account those things, take into co-ops they have in New York and things like that. So generally, landlord-tenants have always been states' rights. And until the past, I would say, 2 years, you'd never even hear the president talk about housing issues and those kind of things. And that has entirely changed since the pandemic, since, rent prices have gone up across the country. And so now, President Biden came out with a blueprint for renters' rights. I think that was in January, which is the first time we've ever seen something like that before. And so we've seen a couple of those types of memos, policies, I would call them wish lists out of the executive branch asking for, hey, this is what we want to see across the country.
And then, so they propose, their plan. Will it be hard to get in? Like, is that something that can just be automatically spread to every state, or be like a per state has to want to adapt?
Yeah, excellent question. That's always the first one we get, which is, there's no way for it to just be pushed out. So if you go back to like civics class in 6th grade, right, you have the president is supposed to be the executive branch, is enforce laws. It's the legislature that actually passes the laws. Yeah. So the president himself, regardless of what party you're a part of, can't just create a new law and say, hey, this applies across all 50 states.
Got it.
That has to go through the legislature. So what President Biden did is just set his blueprint for residents' rights, saying, hey, this is what I'd like to see, fair leases, disclosures of everything, a couple different options.
Yeah. Let's kind of touch on it.
Leave it to an attorney to bring notes for everything. So, but safe, quality, and accessible, affordable housing. It sounds great. Everybody likes that. Clear and fair leases, education, enforcement, enhancement of renters' rights, the right to organize, and eviction prevention, diversion, and relief, which is obviously just kind of stopping evictions or getting potentially, the right to counsel or financial aid, things like that. And so it's kind of the wish list of the executive branch, but they can't really do anything. And he acknowledges it in that blueprint as well, saying, look, we don't have the authority to make this law. All we can do is have our agencies look into their powers to see what they can do. So like if companies, for example, are making fraudulent leases, confusing consumers, maybe the FTC or the CFPB, all these different agencies can look into whether they can do something.
One of the things or two things that raise some red flags for me, or that I would probably need more understanding of, is the enforcement and right to organize. I mean, kind of what is he trying to touch on with that? Because right to organize, that sounds like union.
And that's exactly what it is, which is funny because realistically, and it doesn't affect the AZREIA in terms of like the single family homes, right? Not really a big issue because your homes are spread out. But in a multifamily community, it's like so the residents could get together, meet, and figure out who knows what they want to do, which is perfectly fine. We actually have that in Arizona law already. You can't retaliate for a tenant joining a tenant's union.
Right.
But most landlords don't care. Like if you guys want to get together in one of your units and talk whatever your rights are, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Not really a big issue. Same with education enforcement is literally, that's more, hey, advising tenants of their rights. Like you can't have leases that are confusing. And if you do, some agency has the right to come after you for consumer protection issues.
Gotcha.
What would make a lease confusing?
Exactly. Well, I think a lot of the national talk right now is trying to make an argument, whether you agree or not, making apartments, single-family homes, more akin to how they argue with hotel bookings and airlines bookings, right? Like you book your flight, and then you get there and there's baggage fees, and there's an extra seats fee, and all these other things. And that's kind of what they're saying is not necessarily clear in leases. Like, oh, you advertise $1,500 a month, but your rent is actually plus. It's actually $1,900. That's not clear.
We also said no pets, but you got pets.
Exactly.
Said no smoking, but you're smoking too.
All right, cool.
True.
Fair. So anything else on the federal side of things?
Well, I mean, there's a couple more things. I mean, obviously, so basically what happens is President Biden announced like his policy of what he'd like to see, and then you see every little different agency under the executive branch start to toy with these ideas. Freddie Mac was the first. I mean, obviously, you guys know what Freddie Mac is. They're not really an agency in that respect, but they, for the first time ever, create like a 50-state analysis of what your rights are. Not a big deal. Compiling data, it's always good. The more data, the better. You just look to what they're looking to. It gives you an indication further of the issues that states and the feds are going to look at. So they talk about tenant screening, rent and late payments, habitability issues, and more eviction issues as well. And so again, they're going to tenant protection. They don't want abuses on like screening. That's a big issue for some reason.
Right.
There's a narrative that landlords are like making a killing off of doing screening.
Screening, yeah.
Not realizing screening is the only chance you get to figure out who
Protect
you're going
yourself.
into a business with,
Yeah.
right? Like if I rent to you, we're in business for a year.
Yeah.
I better trust you.
Yeah.
No different than if you go out and buy a house. I guarantee your lender is going to figure out everything they can before they, give you $500,000 to go buy a house.
That's true.
So it's interesting to see that being attacked. And then HUD did the same thing. HUD came out with something about talking about junk fees, saying that landlords are just charging too much on top. They just want a simple number and nothing else. Really.
Kind of like, did that happen with the settlement statements years ago? Like junk fees and
got to
home
disclose.
Similar?
it all.
Disclosure is everything.
Yeah.
That's it. And realistically, landlords do disclose everything in their lease.
Yeah, I don't understand what we would. Well, I don't know. I guess I'm not that type of landlord, but like I don't know what would you hide or like
It's not. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's the difference between advertising and when the person comes. Like if you put a sign up that says $1,500, but it's not really $1,500 because they have to pay for whatever benefits there are with that community as well, or that single family home. And I think that's where the issue's coming in. And we see those things same in Arizona. People are trying to, there was a bill this past year to get rid of all of those things and just say you have to have one price, period, end of sentence, no add-ons in the lease.
Got it. So something I was reading up on the Freddie Mac article, and it said there's 3 states that have limits on rent increases, and I guess they give them the right to counsel. So So how's that work? One, and do you see something like that coming to Arizona?
I don't think that's been proposed yet in Arizona fully through the legislature. I definitely know it's being talked about. So in certain cases, literally usually criminal, for example, we have a constitutional right. If you're going to go to jail or you have the potential to go to jail, the state will pay for you to get an attorney, right? Like that's where it comes up. And now somehow the discussion's gotten to that if you're being subject to eviction, you should also have the state pay for you to have an attorney.
Wow.
A lot of things with tenants' rights, I'm actually a proponent of. I think there's a lot of good times that a lot of good ideas out there. I honestly think that's a really bad idea, though. If you're going to pay an attorney to go represent the tenant, the majority of all eviction cases are non-payment of rent.
Right.
Just
Exactly.
pay the rent.
Pay the rent.
Yep.
And then the tenant gets to stay, the landlord gets made whole. Litigating an eviction so everybody wastes attorney's fees doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big proponent of that one, even though there are other things that I think are potentially a good idea. But I think rental assistance over the pandemic, federal government put out millions upon millions of dollars, and a lot of people were able to stay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good option if that's what we want to start throwing money towards.
Oh, that'd be very interesting. Yeah, that'll just drag on the whole process of eviction if they got counsel, which everyone has the right to counsel, but if you have the government paid for the attorney to fight you, they'll just drag on your whole eviction process.
And no offense to you, Mark, but attorneys like to have it drag on because it increases their fees.
It's not a great idea. I mean, because you got to realize when we see those types of issues, the first thing that the attorney will do, those subsidized attorneys will come in and ask for a jury trial. So a trial that used to take me 15 minutes to 30 minutes to get out the facts, now it's going to take me 2 days of attorney's fees.
Wow.
And it's just, that doesn't help the landlord. It doesn't help the tenant. They just, hopefully they can throw enough mud against the wall. But ultimately the tenant still owes the money. It's just, how do you get to that point?
And the whole time the tenant is still in the property.
Correct.
Man, yeah, I had this situation where I had a 5-plex. I bought it, just junker, cash as is, but there was tenants in there. They're supposed to be all month to month. And I learned a lot of stuff on there, but they didn't pay rent. Then I gave them their 5-day notice. I served them all that stuff. We all showed up in court, and they all brought leases, fresh 1-year leases. Like, I'm like, and so I was like, I told the judge, I was like, how do we know this is real? And he's like, that's another case. Right? So, yeah, there's a lot. So how do we protect ourselves? I was told to get a estoppel.
Yeah, I mean, a certificate from the former owner. In those types of cases, we see the same thing all the time. We'll drag the former owner into court as well. Be like, that's not my signature on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, generally, and this is just Arizona because I just practice here. The general presumption is when you buy a property, you take it to whatever subject rights the person has in that property.
Right.
So in your case, if they're just month to month, they don't really have much rights other than a 30-day notice. But if they have a year lease, you take it subject to that. If, for example, though, that they have actually a lease with an option, you're subject to that option.
Yep.
Because the law says you have constructive notice. You got to go to that door, knock on the door, say, hey, what are you doing here? What are your rights? And if you don't ask that question, you're stuck with whatever they have. And I've seen literally options come up later, and they're like, oh, I have an option to buy it for $450. And the guy that owns it now is like, well, I bought it for $700. And they're like, well, you have to sell it to me for $450.
Wow. Never thought about that.
So,
man, yeah.
It hurts.
So the judge goes, did you guys bring rent today? He saved me.
Yeah.
They're like, no, we didn't bring rent. He's like, well, what do you...
Right. You brought a lease, but you didn't bring the rent.
Yeah. It's funny, man. All right, cool. So that you just went over the Freddie Mac memorandum, tenant screening.
I think that's most of it on the Fed stuff. It's just more eyeballs that's ever been on this. And that stuff kind of does push down as well, at least now for states. States.
And we have our business associate, Rent Perfect, for tenant screening. Always check them out. Junk fees, we know what are junk fees. Anything else along the junk fees?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just being careful. I mean, my default with everything, and maybe it's the attorney me, is disclose everything.
Yeah.
The more upfront you can be on what you require and what you don't, put it out there. I think that goes the same thing with whatever you want in your rental property as well. You as a landlord own that property. That's your asset long term. Whatever you want to happen on your property, what you don't want to happen on your property, put it in your lease, make it clear.
Disclose it.
Just things about like smoking, like you guys mentioned, right? That's clutch. Things that people don't even think about, of like people putting up above ground pools. Well, you may not even have thought about it before, but that's potentially a liability. Like, just prohibit everything that you don't want, allow things that you do. Just control the rights up front.
And for like newer investors, sometimes you get in, you're all excited, you're nervous, and it's like you just want to get a warm body in place, right? So I haven't probably checked in with you in a while on this, but we always tell our members to call Zona Law and get one of their leases. They'll give you one. That's what I inherited from Alan and Marie. So hopefully that's still true.
Yeah.
So what are some things like new landlords can do with all this information coming down, or just as a new landlord in general? Like, can they set up an appointment with you, or do you still have a copy of the lease? Or?
Yeah, we still have a copy of the lease. Yeah, we do consultations as well. There's a reduced fee for AZREIA members.
Cool.
I'm not sure what that is off the top of my head. But yeah, I think the more you can learn up front, the better. I think tenant screening is critical. It amazes me people skip tenant screening.
Yeah.
Or like they get an application, but they don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Like that paper doesn't do you any good. I always say it's like you don't go out to, buy a McDonald's franchise and not learn how to make a Big Mac. You got to figure out the nuts and bolts and to be able to do it.
There's a lot of nuts and bolts too.
Yeah. So tell us about some of these House bills. Let's kind of go over some of those that are being implemented.
Yeah. So this past year has been probably like I mentioned before. We have a Democratic governor and a Republican-held Senate and House. So we're really like a split government, which usually means there's a lot of conflict and battling over what their interests are. Interestingly enough, they just last week passed a bipartisan budget, which is good, which means we're moving in the right direction to kind of finish up this legislative session. But there's been a ton of anti-landlord bills this past year. I think there were at least 5 for rent control, which we've never had in Arizona. We have a state preemption against it. a bunch of bills about changing what the eviction process looks like, changing how you handle applications, all kind of the gambit of landlord-tenant. All
Okay.
eyes are on it.
Okay.
And do you recommend like someone having a property manager versus self-managing? Do you have any preference on that?
I think it depends on your time commitment.
Okay.
I think there's what property managers bring to the table is the experience and the professionalism. And if you can mimic that yourself, go for it.
Yeah.
It's no different than anything, you want to fix in your own house. If you can go fix your toilet, go for it. If you know what you're doing. If you don't, bring a professional in to have them do it.
And does that kind of like, with all the new laws coming down, or even just current, like, does a property manager liable to be aware of all this, or does it fall on strictly the owner if something goes wrong?
No, I mean, there's definitely liability on the property manager. I mean, the property management agreement will spell out exactly how that liability falls. But the reason you hire a property manager is they're supposed to stay abreast of those issues so that you don't necessarily have to. And same thing, I mean, perfect example, people always try and do like evictions themselves. And historically, probably not a big of issue. But over the pandemic, I mean, there's been so many rule changes that for most mom and pops that are doing their own evictions, they get a case or two dismissed before they ever figure out what they're doing.
Got it.
And then yell to the judge, I've been doing this for years. And the judge is like, great, that doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Good point, because sometimes we're on a shoestring budget as mom and pops, right? And you want to say we're investors, you like to, cut costs or whatever it is, but just I always say get paid for it up front. Get that knowledge, get that consultation up front, because my experience, I was just flew blind right into the business, and I always had to go backwards and redo the contract, clean things up.
Which is
I
normal.
feel sorry for you, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike made a lot of mistakes, guys. When he
There's
I have a lot of
them right now.
I could just have you guys can see it in my face. I could have a mistake episode.
There's just one tear going down.
Right.
Man, like Marcus knows, Mark, man, I have property in Cleveland, landlord-friendly.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, big difference. I love Arizona. It's so different.
So I am curious, what's Cleveland like?
Cleveland, well, I found out. I don't want to make a joke, but anyways,
Come on, let's go, Mike.
No, my jokes got me thinking after before we
He's
started.
like, I'm in front of the attorney. I don't.
Well, lead-based paint law was passed. Well, so I guess now it's like every 2 years you got to get inspected for lead-based paint. So now I'm like a year and a half into. We have 10 properties over there. All of a sudden, it's like all your properties got to get lead-based, right? You only make $200-300 a month cash flow. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
They're very strict on if your grass grows like this high. They're always finding and warning you. Always. So
The city comes around.
city comes around. Very strict on that. What else happened? You have. I bought properties with my Arizona LLC out there, and they came after me for not registering as a foreign entity.
In Ohio.
But I did, though, just not at the time of purchase. So they
Interesting.
retroed it. $10,000 fine or 5 years in jail on 4 different properties right now.
Oh, my gosh.
And basically, we're at $2-3 in on attorney fees. It's all my cash flow for how many
It's
years.
gone. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gone. And now, basically, attorneys it's a money grab. They keep
Yeah.
postponing our dates. I'm like 6 months in of just trying to get in front of the judge, and it's just he's like, at the end of the day, they're just gonna charge you $500, and then you just pay it.
Yeah.
It's a game.
It's a racket.
Yeah.
That is a good point, though. That does remind me of something here that I see in mistakes a lot, is people don't realize the same thing here, let alone two parts of it. One, you have to have an entity in Arizona,
Yeah.
whether it's an Arizona LLC or a foreign LLC that's authorized to do business here before you can own properties here. You should be. And then two, you have to register your property as a rental with the county.
That's another. Yep.
Because they tax it differently. And the only way for them to know that you're running it as a business as opposed to living in there is if you register it. So they're actually, I don't know if other states have the same law, but Arizona has a random law that says if you're a tenant in a property and it's not registered, you can give a 10-day notice at any time.
Yep.
And if they don't register it, you can actually just terminate your lease,
Oh,
lease
wow.
and leave.
I didn't know
Which
that.
usually what happens is tenants will send a stack of letters, and somewhere in the middle of that, it'll just write that statute. Landlords see that packet, they get overwhelmed, they don't do anything. 10 days later, the tenant's like, I'm free, I'm done.
Yep.
Give me my deposit back, and they
out.
walk.
And that's here.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah,
Didn't
we
know
see that all the time.
Wow. Yeah, it's so much. And another thing I learned was if you have more than 4 houses in an LLC, which there's always debate around that, I guess if you owe the city money, don't quote me on this, and you have Section 8 tenants, they can garnish your Section 8 rents to pay back anything you owe the city.
Wow, I've never seen it, but it makes sense.
It's like
Me
a
either.
lien.
I just
Yeah.
did. Just found out. So yeah, now we're shuffling. Now you're shuffling around other things. So yeah, so things like that are pretty interesting that I've learned.
Are you
Yeah.
self-managing, Mike?
No, I got a property manager. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
So the property
I'm an
manager
investor,
should be
not a
aware.
manager.
Yeah, he should be aware of that.
It is a good thing to. I mean, you mentioned Section 8, though. I mean, that's a big point also, obviously, what we're talking about
Okay.
recently in the past couple of months is Tucson passed source of income as
Okay,
a
yep.
protected class. Phoenix did the same thing. And there's speculation all over the board of other cities that are going to follow suit here shortly as well. And so I think that changes. That's another indication of kind of where we are as a state and kind of where we're moving.
Can you
to.
break down source of income?
Source of income.
Absolutely. It sounds so simple. It sounds so pleasant, which is kind of the beauty of how the brilliance of legislation. You always make something sound good, and then you don't really look
Right.
into the weeds. So what actually happened is the Fair Housing Act, the city version in Phoenix and Tucson. Right now we have race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. Those are protected classes, meaning you can't discriminate against them. And so what they did, the two cities said, okay, well, source of income is an additional protected class, meaning you can't discriminate against somebody with source of income. No idea what that means by itself. But they define that out and saying you can't discriminate against somebody that's on Section 8, that gets any kind of government subsidy, which would include like unemployment. Basically, wherever the money's coming in from, you can't just say, no, I don't want that kind of money.
Got it.
So hold on, Mark. Let me kind of ask this. So, if the person can't qualify their income, let's just say if they're a quote unquote drug dealer, but they say, you know what, I can afford $1,200 a month. Here's $2,400 for my not earnest money, but my first month's security deposit and first month's rent. So then, by law, I can't say, well, I can't prove where your income is coming from. So,
Yeah, thankfully they did include the word verified in the statute.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, when I
okay.
used to teach that stuff and I would say, what's source of income? People would always be like, it protects drug dealers and strippers. I'm like, no, that's not what the
Okay.
government's interested in. They want verified sources of income. So,
Okay.
I mean, alimony, like court-ordered alimony, court-ordered child support, unemployment, Section 8, government rental assistance, any kind of actual
Okay.
subsidy that you can
Yeah.
prove.
Yeah.
I mean, the big thing is though Section 8, because it's not most landlords. Look, Marcus, if you got a house and somebody's like, I'm going to give you $1,200 a month, or the government's going to give you $1,200, you don't care where the money's coming from,
True.
as long as the money's coming in. The problem with Section 8 is that it's not. You're changing the dynamic of your business, because historically, I've always said, you've got you as a landlord, your tenant as the tenant, two parties. Now you have a third party as the government,
yep.
and you as the landlord actually have to sign, a housing contract with Section 8 as well. So you're changing what your rights are. It's not just where the money's coming from, it's that you have to participate in the programs. And that's the biggest change, really.
Right. And then I know also with Section 8, they come in annually and inspect your property, and then they make you do repairs that more than likely don't need to be made.
Yeah.
So it's an increased cost to you as the landlord also.
Yeah, it gives the government, anytime you're dealing with the government, obviously they have a lot more power than you do as a private individual in that respect. Now, the purposes of the inspections, obviously, to keep habitability
Yeah.
and those kind of things running. So the purpose is really good. The problem is if you fail an inspection, Section 8 doesn't have to pay the rent then. They can abate the rent. And for mom and pops, I think that's really hard. If you're looking at 600 doors in an apartment community and they abate rent for a month while you fix things, it's not going to put that REIT out of business.
Right.
Well, mom and pop that needs to pay their mortgage if they're not covering it, that's a lot more stress on them. And I think that's a lot of what, for AZREIA members, they have to realize that. They have to have the buffer. Don't just buy a house and think you're, cutting a slim margin. Like, realize you're in this, there's risks along with it. And personally, I think that a lot of what we've seen also in the pandemic is a lot of these policies push out smaller landlords. You hear complaints all the time of, we don't want corporate landlords.
Yeah.
If you have policies that pick on the little guys, it pushes them out.
That's true.
True.
Yeah, especially with all these hedge funds coming in and build to rent. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff pushing mom and pop out.
But I think that's why, personally, if there were ever a ask on my side of it, like for AZREIA members, like as they see these things happening, and I think 2024 will be a big year for legislation for Arizona, they're the faces of what people need to hear from, right? Mom and pop AZREIA members own a large swath of the rental market. I know that people always point to corporate rentals, but there's a huge portion, and they're able to work They're more fluid. They can make decisions more on their feet. But
Sure.
And it's their retirement. It's not, they're putting their kids through college. This isn't like some faceless entity. They're the ones that should come down to the legislature and explain, hey, I bought this property. I use this to supplement my income. It's my retirement plan. I can't have these laws passed because it's affecting my income.
So since we're there, do you mind? How do we do that?
How
do our members do that? Whether, because you always hear call, right? So is it call? Is it, you said go down there? Is it a letter? Or what is it?
I think so. Every year the legislature opens. I mean, we're still in the throes of it. We'll close hopefully in the next little while. The legislature will finish out. Legislature opens in January.
Okay.
Bills start coming out at that point. Anybody, I think, we've got lists and lists of bills that affect landlord-tenant matters. AZREIA members, we can send that out through you guys to follow kind of those bills. If there's something that, like any organization that I'm involved in, that people want to get involved in, they can email you guys. I'm happy to put that through AZREIA so that we can kind of get that groundswell to get people to come down. And then it would be like, hey, pushing, for example, we had a bill this past year that took a regular 5-day notice and made it a 15-day notice, which doesn't sound like a big deal. Mm-hmm. But if we could have somebody come from AZREIA and explain, look, the effect of that is I'm now 6 weeks, 8 weeks out before I can evict somebody. That's 2 months of me paying the mortgage where I don't get the money back. Mm-hmm. I'm the face of what you guys have to realize. It's not just big companies.
Yeah.
And again, the big company argument I think is misplaced anyways, because a lot of big companies are like teachers' funds, pensions, things like that. I mean, it's not just the big bad corporation.
So just like they're giving tenants the right to organize, owners should organize also and talk to legislation and let them know exactly how some of these bills and laws hurt, just the private owners.
100%. Absolutely. It's the hardest thing for me to do is talk to people, and they're like, well, who's stopping this? And I'm like, step up.
Yeah.
That's what we need, participation. Like, there's lawsuits over these things. Be the face of the lawsuit. Be the plaintiff. Those kind of things come down to the legislature.
So when it's time to vote, we always get in the mail like explanations of all the bills and the politicians. Do you have anything like that for real estate oriented or?
My firm doesn't. The Multi-Housing Association does have their opinions, guidance on some things for their members. I'm sure if you work with them as well, you guys can put one out for AZREIA, which would help members. I think it's a good idea to kind of be aware of what's going on.
And on one of your bullet points here says, going back to the source of income, must have cause to non-renew. So what's that scenario?
Yeah. So generally in Arizona, the default is you sign a lease. If it's for a year, they're there for a year. At the end of the year, you can decide if you want them or not, or they can send you a non-renewal, or you can send them a non-renewal. It's just a 1-year contract. And so Section 8 makes landlords sign a 1-year contract. But you can't terminate that unless you have cause. There has to be a reason not to renew at that point. So you're almost creating what's called a perpetual lease, meaning they get to stay there unless there's a significant change. Either they breach the lease by something, or now if you want to sell, theoretically, I mean, there's a couple examples of why you can non-renew, but they're specific. And if not wanting to participate is not one of them. It has to be for cause.
So you got to break the lease in some way.
Correct.
Wow. I didn't know that. All these years. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. The only good thing with Section 8, I mean, honestly, I'm a proponent of Section 8, actually.
Yeah, of course.
And there's another company in town that does a private version as well called Threshold. They do an excellent job of onboarding landlords. They even pay money for landlords to join the program. There's a huge benefit there of the subsidies. You just have to know what you're getting into. Generally, it's better if it's voluntary as opposed to being forced through this kind of thing. But you get guaranteed money as long as you know what you're doing.
Right.
If you don't, you're going to get caught, and it's not going to be fun.
Okay.
So overall, a lot of different changes. So we got to stand up, right? Get educated on everything that's going on. Speak up. But overall, from your point of view, like how does this impact investors? Like in our our strategies, and does that make sense? Like, what's the overall impact on it from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the next year, the 2024 election is going to be huge in terms of what the future of our state holds.
Okay.
Governor Ducey was very pro-business, bringing a lot of companies in here. You have like the TSMC, all of those kind of things, which, I mean, if you think about how that affects your real estate prices, the value of property, the amount of people that have moved here. So everything was really going in the right direction. And so I think next year will be a big indicator of where we're going for the future and what that looks like. Right now, as I mentioned, we have a split government. So with a split government, a lot less things get done.
Got it.
Which actually is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that's how our government's set up to be, is both sides kind of push off the wings, and then you have to meet in the middle on some things. And it's only things that meet on the middle. So right now, I would, as an investor, be cautious of what we're looking at, trying to figure out what the market's going to look like. But at the same time, no, people are still moving here. Like,
Got it.
Even till today, people are still moving here, and more developments coming in, more buildings. So we have to be aware of that as well.
So there another section, HB 2381, you mentioned mobile homes. Can you talk a little bit about mobile homes?
Sure. So we represent a lot of the manufactured housing communities throughout the state. There's been a lot of press covering that as well. I mean, it's a different investor entirely that goes into that, because you own the park, you rent the dirt, you're not renting a structure, which we know a lot of investors that love that, actually, because they don't have the maintenance obligations that traditional homes do, where you have to maintain the sticks, maintain everything else that come out of the ground. In a mobile home, you're just taking care of the dirt, and the person has their own home.
Okay.
But a lot of cities are very anti-manufactured home communities, unfortunately. We've seen a couple closings, a lot of PRs come out of that. And so there's been proposals making more regulation on how they handle that as well.
I heard they don't want more mobile home parks in general. Is that what you're saying?
Cities are making it very difficult. Yeah.
Got it.
I don't think right now in the entire city of Phoenix there's a single parcel that is permitted large enough to be able to even build a manufactured housing community.
Wow.
Which is ironic, of course, because it's a very good, affordable housing solution, and everybody's looking for
very much.
affordability. Because the benefit of a MH community is the person that owns that asset. You can buy a very nice home for cheap. I mean, you're renting the land, but you get that home that you have the stability on.
What about, so in regards to all these changes, what about lot rent? Like, that's been skyrocketing. It's even becoming unaffordable for lot rent.
Yeah, I mean, rents have gone up. They're not generally the same way any other rental has. I know there was speculation on what percentage rents had jumped. That's outside my gambit. But it's never as much in MH as it is in the residential.
But does that apply?
Yeah, I mean, people are looking for rent control across the board on everything.
Okay, got it. Okay. Anything on mobile homes, Marcus?
No, I think that's it. We got quite a bit in here. So, Mark, definitely thank you for being here, always giving us the information we need for landlords to stay abreast of the laws and everything like that. So, if we need to get that rental lease from you, how can we do it? What do we need to do in order to reach out to you?
Just give us a call to the office. Our phone number is 480-949-1400. We're here to help AZREIA members. Obviously, we've been doing this for a long time with AZREIA. I think I just looked, actually, because I just sent in the newsletter for next month. I think it's now been 12 years of writing that newsletter every month.
Consistently.
Wow. Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, good point. Newsletter. Make sure all our business associates write that newsletter together. You guys give your perspective on what you're seeing within your business, to help out the members. So, yeah, thank you for that.
I think the newsletter is great for the members. I mean, the amount of information that goes out to people,
it's
great.
It's amazing. So, check out the newsletter. Thank you, Mark, for being here, as always, and being a business associate here at AZREIA. Any last words or anything for us?
No, I guess, give an attorney the floor, they'll always talk. I shouldn't have said no. Really, like I said, next year, whichever way you fall in terms of what your rights and what you want the world to look like or the state to look like, next year's a good place to be active and kind of get your voice out there. So through AZREIA, we'll figure out ways to get that done.
Let's do it. Yeah, and if you're out there, you're listening, you want to step up, like Mark said, or help generate some awareness, give us a call.
All right, guys, you know what to do. Get out there and take action. This is Marcus Maloney, your host of the AZREIA Show, and Mike Del Prete.
Thank you.
And our show airs every
Friday at 8 a.m.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Of
we
course.
really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the AZREIA Show with your hosts, Marcus Maloney and Mike Del Prete. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you found this information valuable, head over to AZREIA.org and learn more about our community.